All right, thank you for attending. Oops, I got 10 billion users. Top 10 steps to a valuable consumer account system. I'm Robin. I direct the product experience for Microsoft's identity services, and so that covers consumer enterprise, some of our platform services, and I've been working on modernizing our user experiences primarily for sign-in and sign-up. And I lead product management for our Microsoft account service, which is where most of these lessons have come from for today's talk. I'm really thrilled to be back at Identiverse in person. It's just so exciting to be on stage. And also Identiverse, in my 5-year identity career, that's 5 out of 27 at Microsoft, I've really had the most kind of inspiring experiences at Identiverse. So the last time I attended in person was actually in Washington, D.C., and this was one of my memorable experiences there. So hopefully can repeat something similar. I saw the Lady Gaga impersonator up close this morning, so that was also a thrill. So this is a talk about value. And if you were at Andy's talk, in the previous hour or previous half hour, hopefully you got schooled a little bit on the best way to build architecture for consumer identity systems. But a really important principle is of an identity system is that it contributes to the value and engagement of your end user and consumer business. So the opposite of value is really let's just start with that. Like, growth is good, right? Everybody wants to get more customers, get more sign-ins, get more sign-ups, get more logins. Like, it's all great. But growth for the sake of growth isn't necessarily all good. What's wrong with this picture? So you can see in the middle a global population of 8 billion. And the circle around the outside represents, I'm just going to pick on Microsoft for a second. We have a really big consumer ecosystem. So our number of accounts and counting now, 12 billion in 1, 12 billion in 2, 12 billion in 3, 12 billion in 4, somewhere between 10 and 12 billion on a regular basis. That's not good. And there's reasons that your systems can get to be this way. Not everybody's system is as big as ours, but I think there's some principles we can apply to kind of avoid that situation and also correct the situation, creating value for users and also creating value for the business that your identity system is fronting. So I'm going to start with number 1. And the principle here is really about getting to 1 account per user, or at least getting to 1 useful account per user in your system. And I want to tell a story just sort of based on my personal experience. It isn't necessarily a Microsoft story, but it's illustrative of the type of problem that can happen in consumer ecosystems, especially with identity accounts. So I want to start with my mom, Ronnie. And this is not going to be a story about an old lady who gets phished or doesn't know what to do on the internet. She was a professional in a law office for more than 30 years, and she was one of the early adopters of like an online identity. She signed up for an email account at AOL.com, which she used for over 20 years, up until very, very recently. And I think she was very savvy. And she managed to be so successful using Ronnie at AOL.com that one day she expanded her device universe and she moved from a PC, got a tablet, got a phone. It happened to be a Windows phone at the time. And she adds also her account. It seems the same, adds it onto her phone, but it's actually a Microsoft account. And then sometime later, that phone went the way of all things, and she ends up with an iPhone. And so now she's got that account, but on iCloud, and on until one day something happens with that phone. She hasn't used a password in a while. She can't figure out how to get in, and she says, "Forget it. I'm giving up on AOL. Too much spam. Can't remember my password. I'm going to just go with Yahoo." Sets that up, can't get into her phone, so the tech says, "Oh, let's just create another iCloud account. We'll just set that up for you. Everything will be fine. We'll reset it." So now she's got an email account, an iCloud account. and on until she ends up with more and more accounts. So I was there maybe a couple of months ago and found remnants of these accounts all over the devices, and usually because somebody was trying to help her just solve a problem. So this obviously is not good, but it's one of the reasons we end up with these like millions or billions or hundreds of thousands, whatever scale you're at. We end up with accounts that are unwanted. Users don't understand always why they need them, where they're stored, how to reset them, and they become disposable. So there's some things you can do. I mean, we talk about using single sign-on techniques, which sort of prevents unnecessary friction for the users, prevents unnecessary sign-in prompts, which is really great. But even more important than that is we need to encourage our users to add backup info early in the journey. They need to verify that info frequently, and there's things you can do in your system to kind of check up on that and make sure that the credentials are fresh. And if you support passwords, which most systems do today, consider supporting modern alternatives. We had a whole bunch of talk on passkeys this morning, gave a demo on how passkeys are starting to work everywhere. And there's other more modern alternatives that can help users sort of never get into this state of sort of forgetting things and not getting back into their account. So I want to talk about number 2, which is about brand and value proposition. And a value proposition is basically what's in it for me. So first of all, identity is the place where a user might encounter your service for the very first time. Perhaps they landed on your website, perhaps they downloaded your app, but their first interaction is usually about them signing up for an account, getting involved in logging in for services. And there is this question of trust that the user experience can express. So can I trust you? When we first made the Microsoft account mandatory for signing into the Windows operating system, so we did that for consumer users of Windows 10, and now it's mandatory for consumers in Windows 11. Most users, even my mom, were pretty accustomed to, yeah, you got to log in to use a device. But people were coming in and saying, shouldn't you know me by now? Like, why do I have to do this again? Like, I was signed in like in 5 other places. Why don't you know me? There were others who were kind of wondering, like, what will happen if I do this? Like, what are you going to, if I give you an account, if I give you credentials, like, what's going to happen? Do I need this? Like, I'd rather not go through the hassle. Like, I don't know if I trust you. You're just going to throw a bunch of advertising at me. And some were like, I do use Office, but I don't believe I have a Microsoft account. So then we had some confusion about, like, what even is a Microsoft account? Lots of brands in the system. And so, this may seem like a simple thing, but, here on mobile login screens, and these are screens that exist today, just subtle differences, like the buttons in different places, the words are slightly different, the branding is ever so slightly different, and it starts to sort of provoke the question, can I trust you, right? So instead of this, even just subtle things like common UX controls, a common look and feel, the button is always in the same place. This provides a more trustworthy experience. And you see the messaging, it's together, welcome, and it's all here with the one account. So these are things that are very important, especially if you have multiple brands in your ecosystem. And so you got to let users know what they can do. You got to highlight the things they care about. For example, like keeping their data and files safe, or they're going to be able to make purchases. They're going to be able to secure their financial information or their health, patient data, like whatever it is that you're securing. Let them know, that there's value in having this account. And then, in terms of the UX design, obviously make it as integrated as possible with your company's brand and look and feel, and so you established sort of credibility around the user experience as well. So number 3, when you're measuring value, you actually have to measure what matters. And I took the title of this section from John Doerr's book, Measure What Matters, where the focus is on this concept of objectives and key results. And so the cool thing about an objective and key result, or OKR, is you can set an objective, and it can be aspirational, like maximize subscription revenue, or, reach 5 billion in consumer revenue. And then the key results allow you to measure things along the way, and you can update these every time a key result is reached. So, for example, increase sign-up rates, 50% of the users can sign into 2 or more services, getting users to stay signed in longer. If you're in an ads-driven business, then, obviously having people logged in longer, having them online longer, that, allows you to get better targeting, drive some of these other metrics. So that's important. And then the other thing, the good data, good telemetry is a foundation for measuring this impact and sort of knowing how you're doing against your KRs. So some examples of inconclusive data. So it used to be every month I would get a report that would have a chart something like this, right? Like, oh yeah, there's a trend. It's going down, it went up, it's going down. So, you can start to kind of, you can go, well, there's a dip. Why did we have a dip? But it doesn't really tell you sort of how you're doing against the story. And then you might get some other counts, like some other numbers like, hey, there were 900, billion, I don't even know what that was. We don't have 900 billion active. There were 49 million new, 15% signed up, and okay, is that good? Does that tell me anything? And then this one I really liked. Recently we released a new consent prompt, and I got this report that said it was 2,000%, week over week growth, asterisk. Like, okay, what does that mean? So a better representation, for example, would be like, here we can track our sign-in success, our sign-up success, and then we track the consent UX rollout over time to see if we can correlate, hey, look, we had a little bit of drop in sign up right when this thing went up. Maybe we can figure out what's going on. In fact, having data like this that was correlated allowed us to experiment with some changes to the user experience and sort of get the numbers a little bit closer to where we wanted them to be. So let's go with number 4. Obviously, consumers equal mobile consumers. Everybody is on a phone today. I'm coming from the most PC-centric company in the world, and we concede consumers are mobile, and it's really important that the identity experience acknowledge that and is optimized for those experiences. So back to my diagram. By the way, thank you, ChatGPT, Bing Create, for kind of helping with these graphics. So we have a global population of 8 billion, and it turns out 15 billion mobile devices. And you would say, oh, isn't that bad too? Isn't that like you said, 12 billion users, 8 billion? Actually, when I looked at the stats as to why this is, it turns out that tons of people have multiple devices. Some people live in multiple countries. Some have devices for work and home. Sometimes you have smart devices that are also mobile. You have iPads and iPhones and various different tablets in the house. So this is a real stat. People are logging in everywhere all the time. 7.2 billion mobile users, right? And the cool thing about that, though, is we can actually utilize, mobile flows and some of the native experiences that are getting built in. I got a chance to demo the passkey working in the iOS experience and in the Google experience today on their mobile devices. So that's getting more common. And then even when you have interactions with other screens like consoles, PlayStations, Xbox, TVs, in-car media systems. I was talking to Andy Cameron just about that last night. And you can start to utilize the fact that users actually have their phones with them virtually all the time, and that can help them get logged in faster as well. And so we really want to take a look at their experiences. Everybody's getting more comfortable with the idea of QR codes, et cetera. So that gives us a lot of opportunity to get them in more easily, which also is a value creator. So number 5 is more devices, more value. And this may seem really, really obvious, you know, of all the things that are kind of in my top 10 here. But it's something we really track. We actually, in our company, we actually calculate kind of this notion of a lifetime value of a user. And you'd think that, well, doesn't that have to do with the applications they use? Doesn't it have to do with the services they use? And do they like what they're getting? Do they like what they're paying? Is it the right price? But it turns out that, you know, if you can get them in more than one app, that will drive the lifetime value up. You know, obviously they got to be able to log into more than one app, and that has a lot to do with their account experience. But in particular, if you can get them in on more than one device, so if they have 2 or more devices, we've seen that drive up to 4 times more lifetime value per customer. So really important to get those users, you know, not only just have recoverable accounts, but to get those accounts on as many devices as possible and get those active. That represents like the right user to kind of target, you know, new stuff to and sort of get them involved in your ecosystem. If you want to, you know, back to that, you know, aspirational, we want to drive revenue, you know, that's all part of driving value. So number 6, like we're going to beat the drum on this one at this conference, right? Passwords are bad. Everybody can attack passwords. There's nobody here who hasn't had an account that was, you know, somehow you know, attacked or attempted to be hijacked. Passwords are just bad, bad, bad. So, you know, I was talking about my mom's experience when I discovered all those various like iCloud accounts floating around the house. The reason I knew about them is because there were lots of little Post-its like this, right? Some of you know people who've got the Post-its. This is real, this is a problem, this is not the way the world should operate. So first thing, obviously, you know, Andy talked about this in his presentation, you gotta have, you know, all kinds of protections in the architecture. In fact, I encourage you, if you can get a hold of that, there was like some great advice about the architecture that you can build for consumer identity systems. But a key part of that, obviously, is getting second factor, multi-factor authentication in there. Do whatever you can to provide passwordless options. This is now more than ever is the best time to implement support for WebAuthn, you know, getting new techniques like passkey, which are both user-friendly and you know, approaching phish-resistant. So they're so much more secure. And then some folks have been building WebAuthn directly into their apps, not relying on like authenticators. But you can also, you know, now we've got passkey in the operating system. So wow, you know, there's a lot of choices for this, and it really helps your users. It's, you know, it's not just about, you know, keeping the bad guys out. It's really helping your users stay engaged and driving that value for your system. So number 7, well, SMS is bad too. I mean, we don't talk about this that much, but in a consumer ecosystem, you would think, well, you know, you just told me they're all on phones, you know, logging with a phone number, it's so easy. You probably need it as a backup credential, you know, so they can get back into the account. Yes, that's all true. But it also turns out it'll cost you a pile of money. And there's a reason for this. Sort of the price structure for SMS messages is inconsistent around the world. It goes up and down depending on the country or the market that you're in. And these international revenue share attack vectors have been around for quite a long time, and they've gotten really clever. They've really figured out how to take advantage of, especially the big services. But you can really be vulnerable to that if you're a service of any size. So it's really important to put protections in to prevent that. And we know that you're going to need SMS in the system if you've got mobile users. It's going to need to be, you know, a phone number on file somewhere. But you know, my message here is, you know, don't be surprised by this. Don't be hung out to dry or caught unawares. Implement protections such as reputation services. That was another great suggestion in the previous presentation about, you know, getting reputation services hooked up, anti-fraud signals into your system. and then be able to respond dynamically, when you see spikes in the system that look like there's these kinds of attack vectors. And the other thing you can do, like even though users do need to sometimes put their phone numbers in and validate them, is there are things you can do to reduce kind of that good usage. And some of that is by, encouraging your customers to get more and more enrolled, if you will, in more modern authentication methods. So they don't have to use that phone number to get into your system. So number 8, no consumer talk would be complete without a talk about the regulatory climate, especially when it comes to user data and privacy. So first of all, it's not just a good idea, it actually is the law. There's a virtual alphabet soup of laws that's been coming out and rolling out over the last few years. And probably one of the first ones most of us remember or got exposed to was this do not track, and having our browsers be able to protect us, have a user be able to choose to have their browser history to check. But now we've got, there was COPPA, which is still in force around securing privacy for children online. GDPR was a huge one for this community, obviously, and it's a robust set of laws around account ownership and data ownership and age gating and a number of other regulations. California's put in their state privacy regulation. There's the personal information protection laws in China. There's there's consent in Korea, and then there's a whole bunch of others, sort of coming on the books. Digital Markets Act is another big one that's coming up. And why we care about this in consumer ecosystems in particular is because there's EU regulation specifically around how users sign in. So it's not just about consent, it's not just about privacy, but it's about making sure that users really know what they're signing up for and what they're doing online when they sort of traverse, from one app to another, or from an OS to another, or one browser to another, and so forth. So the tricky part about this is most of us aren't lawyers, and some of our operations aren't even big enough to sort of interpret all of these things. So I definitely want to advise, anybody who's an identity professional to have a good relationship, with the legal departments, get them involved in helping assess your identity roadmaps and making sure those are compliant with the latest laws. And then, if you don't have a huge operation, it can be advantageous if you're leasing identity services from a vendor, who is making sure to keep their system up to date over time and make sure that your systems remain compliant, especially for your users who are becoming more and more aware of their own privacy and their own rights. Security and privacy are actually getting closer together in terms of, that's one thing we discovered in our user research lately, that some users don't necessarily distinguish between security and privacy as much as maybe we do. We may even have completely different teams or different departments that look at that, but they're really coming together. So do keep that in mind. Number 9, this should be self-evident, but everything, everywhere, all at once. Your systems, you got to have the uptime. You can't have single points of failure. You've got to have systems in place that protect not only your digital estate, but really you're protecting value. Let's bring it back to the theme of this talk. Minutes of downtime times, the average revenue per minute, that is your downtime losses. And so, even if you've got 4 nines of availability in your system, that still means you could be down for, 52 minutes a year. It doesn't sound like that much, 4 hours in a month. But what happens is, if you're down for 4 minutes and I'm ordering dinner from Panda Express, I can't get in, I'm hungry. I'm going to go take my business somewhere else. If I'm trying to buy the last minute Christmas gift and I'm within those 4 minutes, I'm going to go to another retailer. We have customers on our SIAM platform, who've shared with us what it's like for them if we lose 30 seconds or a minute or more of downtime. It translates to real revenue. So this is so important in consumer systems. All the systems are designed to be recoverable and self-healing and all of that, but it really contributes to sort of the value in the system. And my 10 is not a 10, it's a 0. I think everybody knows zero trust is a principle we'll be talking about. We've been talking about it for the last several years. But really those principles come into play with consumers. And, Andy was sharing about the architectures you can use, putting firewalls and fraud protection. This is so important. And I want to credit my colleagues who have presented on this content at RSA and other venues. But fraud is everywhere. We've got the bots, we've got the phishing attacks, cryptocurrency. I talked about IRSF and SMS. Total, scams all over the place. We've experienced kind of failovers because somebody's just found an attack vector where they're signing in over and over again, creating hundreds of thousands or even millions of accounts just because you can. Accounts getting sold on the dark web. It's everywhere. It's happening to all consumer services that are out there, not just the big ones. So this is really an important principle to sort of uphold. So things that you can do and you should do, you obviously got to put your architectures in place. But it's super important that you map your user journeys according to user risk and categorize the sort of the high risk operations, because that's where you want to get more strong off. We may do all these really neat operations and techniques to get users in quickly. But once they're in, we want to make sure we protect even the most high-risk operations that they're going to do and make sure that's behind strong auth. You got to apply controls like identity proofing or multi-factor. We've talked about multi-factor. There's some scenarios like there was an industrial scenario shown this morning where identity proofing in addition to kind of authentication was required just to prove you actually have the credential to be here. Using real-time risk analysis, using reputation, putting CAPTCHA in front of certain operations. But be careful with CAPTCHA also because the bad guys have learned to emulate some of those patterns, and so your approach needs to be dynamic. You need to have some kind of response team. You need to be able to have telemetry and monitoring and sort of see what's going on in your system. And you need to adapt when you see those suspicious patterns. And broken record on this, you got to replace attackable password and SMS-based authentication methods. You got to do it. Make sure the support is there, the environment is ready, the devices are ready. Get your applications and services ready. So with that, I want to thank and acknowledge some of the folks who contributed content to this presentation. And I think we just had a brief time today, but I believe I have a few minutes available for questions if there are any from the audience. Thank you.
I had some questions on the back end of, so you already have these users, you have more than one account per user. Have you found any best practices around like account cleanup, account linking, account merging?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So all of the above, although I will say account linking is very difficult. There's a lot that can go wrong in that process. There's a lot of challenges. In our system, we've focused primarily on the account cleanup vector, and honestly, with billions of accounts, that is a very expensive process for us, and we have multiple brands. There's different reasons why users have multiple accounts sometimes, so we want to allow that. But at the same time, with the amount of dead accounts, if you will, it takes some business negotiations with the different teams. For example, like say somebody bought a game. They haven't played it in 5 years. They still might, their kid might show up and want to play that game. So we have to be careful about not deleting licenses, for valid content that people own. So I would say, you got to negotiate with the business owners about, what constitutes the definition of an unused account. If you're going to implement account linking or account merging, have a good design, do a lot of testing. It's hard. And be prepared if you're going to do delete on a large system to, spend some time and processing on that, manage it very, very carefully from an operations standpoint. Yep.
Excellent demo this morning with Alex.
Thank you.
On the topic of privacy,
Yeah.
I noticed you obscured part of your mother's accounts, but I noticed that you didn't obscure some of yours, including a phone number. It looked like an actual Redmond area code phone number. I don't know if you intended to publish an actual phone number to the world and your Gmail account. So.
Oh, this morning.
No. In this slide deck here.
That was
going back about 15, 16 slides.
I don't mind, when my teams, for me, it's one thing, but, for my mother, it's another. I went, just revealing a different part of my persona. I've been working for 27 years in Microsoft. I'm all about, making my teams happy and being there for them. So usually the first thing I do in a presentation is post my phone number and say, call me anytime. That's just me. So hopefully nobody will use that to, for nefarious purposes, but thank you for pointing that out. And call me anytime. If you, if you get arrested, you can use me as your first call. It's good. I'll take that call.